A billionaire pretended to be poor to find true love. The ending will surprise you. James Donovan looked out the window of his office in one of the tallest buildings in New York. Outside, the city never stopped, and below him, life moved at a frantic pace. He sighed, wondering how it was possible to feel so empty with everything he had. He had money, power, and respect, but he was missing the most important thing: true love. Tired of dates that only aimed at his fortune, James decided he needed a drastic change. The world around him seemed built on interests, appearances, and transactions, and he wanted to escape from that. He needed to know if somewhere, someone could love him for who he was, not for what he owned. After weeks of reflection, he made a bold decision: to disguise himself and live as an ordinary man. His goal was simple: to find genuine love, something that not even all the money in the world seemed able to buy. Without telling anyone, James prepared for this new phase of his life. He secured trust contracts with his team to ensure his absence wouldn't raise suspicions. He spent weeks organizing everything until he was finally ready. He traveled to a small coastal town where no one knew him. There, he rented a modest house, took on the name James Carter, and started working at a local cafe, a quiet place far from the spotlight that usually followed him. With his new simple look, less groomed hair, casual clothes, and a more relaxed manner, he began to blend in with the townspeople. His plan was to get close to people without raising suspicions. At the cafe, he dedicated himself to serving customers, washing cups, and learning routines that seemed so distant from his previous life. Although it was something completely outside his comfort zone, the experience brought him an unexpected sense of freedom. It was on a rainy morning that he met Grace. She came into the cafe hurriedly, trying to shield herself from the rain with a broken umbrella. James, who was behind the counter, noticed her gentle smile when she ordered a coffee and a piece of pie. She was striking, not because of what she wore or how she presented herself, but by the way she talked to the people around her. Grace owned a small flower shop at the end of the street, a business she had inherited from her mother and was struggling to keep. Slowly, James and Grace began to get to know each other. She came by the cafe every day before opening her shop, always exchanging a few words with him. Unlike many people James had known in his previous life, Grace seemed genuine, without ulterior motives. She talked to him as if he were just another town resident, and this simplicity was what charmed him the most. In one of their daily conversations, James discovered that Grace's flower shop wasn't doing well. Competition from big online flower stores was killing small businesses, and she struggled to stay afloat. He realized how much Grace cared about her mother's legacy, and how each flower she sold seemed to carry a piece of her history. Despite all the difficulties, Grace didn't give up, and this made James feel increasingly attracted to her. As the days passed, James got more involved in Grace's life. He started helping at the flower shop on his days off, learning about flowers and trying, discreetly, to contribute whatever he could to help her business grow. Grace was surprised by his interest but welcomed his help. Their relationship grew slowly, with conversations and simple moments that felt much more real than anything James had experienced before. Every day, James felt he was getting closer to finding what he had always sought: true love, free of interests and superficiality. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't keep his true identity hidden forever. The fear that Grace would discover the truth and reject him haunted him with every step he took. He began to question how much longer he could live this lie. However, he also knew that if he wanted to prove that Grace's love was genuine, he would have to continue his disguise. The internal tension between revealing his true identity or continuing to live as an ordinary man began to weigh on his shoulders. Every moment with Grace brought him closer to what he had always desired, but the threat of the imminent truth was always present. Life in his new town was transforming him. He no longer missed his old routine or the luxuries he was used to. Each new day seemed simpler, yet more purposeful. The small victories, like helping Grace close a good sale or seeing a customer happy with a bouquet, filled his heart in ways he never thought possible. Perhaps, after all, what he was looking for was there, in the simplicity of a life lived with authenticity. As James continued to grow closer to Grace, the internal conflict in his heart grew every day. He knew he was lying about who he really was, but the thought of losing Grace tormented him even more. Each act of kindness and every sincere conversation they had only increased his anguish. How long could he keep up this lie? With each passing day, the truth seemed harder to reveal, and James feared that if Grace found out on her own, she would never forgive him. Grace, on the other hand, seemed increasingly comfortable with James's presence. Although she didn't know much about his past, she saw him as someone simple, dedicated, and supportive. She appreciated how he was always willing to help, as if nothing in the world was more important to him than being there by her side. Grace started to open up more, sharing with James her childhood memories, the struggles she faced since her mother's death, and her dream of one day expanding the flower shop into something bigger. These conversations only added to James's guilt. He listened attentively, but he knew that at any moment, the bubble of happiness they had created could burst. He tried to push away the fear of rejection, but the feeling of betraying Grace's trust was constant. At the same time, he knew that revealing his true identity at this point could destroy everything they had built. James began to withdraw, worried that Grace might discover his lie by accident. He avoided questions about his past, changed the subject when money or business came up, and kept her from getting too close to his personal life. Grace noticed these changes but didn't ask questions, trusting that he had his reasons for being discreet. However, this invisible barrier between them began to grow, creating a silent tension that James knew he couldn't sustain for much longer. The breaking point started to take shape when an old acquaintance of James, unaware of his disguise, visited the small town to negotiate the purchase of some land. The man recognized James on the street, despite his disguise, and tried to approach him in public, calling him by his real name. James, quickly realizing the danger of the situation, managed to disguise the conversation and eluded the acquaintance, but the incident left him on high alert. He knew that this kind of situation could happen again at any moment, making him reflect on how risky his choice had been. At the same time, Grace noticed something was wrong. James seemed more tense, worried, as if carrying a burden she couldn't understand. Although he remained kind and present, the emotional distance between them grew. Grace began to wonder if he was hiding something important but was afraid to push him. She liked him, felt increasingly connected, but didn't know if she could fully trust someone who seemed to have secrets. Gradually, the relationship that was once light and full of simple, happy moments began to be affected by growing mistrust. Grace started to notice small inconsistencies in James's stories. He avoided talking about his past, his answers were vague, and he often changed the subject when conversations got too deep. She knew something was being hidden, but she still couldn't figure out what. James felt the weight of this mistrust, which left him even more torn. Every day, the lie grew, and he knew he needed to tell the truth. But how? How could he explain to Grace that everything she knew about him was a facade, from his name to the job he pretended to have? The fear of losing the love he had finally found paralyzed him. The moral conflict consumed him. He knew he was wrong to lie, but justified to himself that it was all for the sake of finding true love. However, the more he tried to convince himself he was on the right path, the harder it became to ignore the fact that building a relationship on lies could never work. He was trapped in a web of his own making, and the way out seemed increasingly distant. James's dilemma reached its peak one evening when Grace invited him to dinner at her house. The atmosphere was perfect. The table was neatly set, and the smell of homemade food filled the air. They talked as usual, but this time, there was something different in Grace's eyes. She looked directly at James and, in a soft voice, asked, "Who are you really, James?" The question hit James like a punch. He remained silent for a moment, unable to respond. Grace wasn't demanding answers aggressively, but the pain in her eyes made it clear she knew he wasn't being completely honest. James desperately wanted to tell the truth, open his heart, and confess everything. But the very thought of losing Grace terrified him. What would she do if she found out who he really was? Doubt and fear filled his mind as he struggled to figure out how to handle the moment. Grace waited patiently for an answer, her heart racing. She liked James, but the uncertainty was starting to erode her trust. She knew he was hiding something, and the question of who he really was could no longer be ignored. When Grace asked who he really was, James felt the weight of the truth pressing on his shoulders. This was the moment he had dreaded. His hands tensed and his heart raced. Grace watched him expectantly, hoping he would finally be honest. But instead of confessing the truth, his fear of losing what they had built put up a wall. In a split-second decision, James chose to lie again, creating a new story. "Grace, I'm not the man you think I am, at least not in the traditional sense," he began, hesitantly. "My name is James Carter, but I'm running from something. I used to be a businessman in a bigger city, and I got into some serious trouble. I was betrayed by people I trusted, lost almost everything, and this was the only way I found to start over. I moved here to escape that chaos and try to build a new life, far from everything that happened." Grace stayed silent, absorbing James's words. She hadn't expected such a dramatic revelation, but in some ways, this story made sense. His closed-off demeanor, his evasions when asked about the past, it all fit. She knew he had been hiding something, and now it seemed like he was finally opening up. James continued, carefully watching Grace's reaction. "I didn't want to drag you into this, didn't want you to worry or be suspicious. But the more time went on, the more I felt like I had to tell you. I just wanted a chance to start over, and you were the first person who made me feel like that was possible." The lie came out smoothly, but the weight of telling it was immense. He knew he was getting further entangled in a web of deceit. At the same time, he felt a small sense of relief when he saw Grace's eyes soften. She believed him, at least for now. "I understand," Grace said, with a look of empathy. "I know starting over isn't easy, especially when you're carrying the weight of something from your past. I just wish you had told me sooner." James sighed, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. "I know, and I'm sorry I wasn't honest from the beginning. I was afraid of losing you. You're the first person in a long time who's made me feel like there's still hope." Grace smiled slightly, but there was still a distance between them, a shadow of doubt. Though James's words were convincing, the wall he had built with his lies remained standing. She could forgive him for not being truthful from the start, but now, Grace still needed time to process everything. Even though his explanation made sense, something inside her still questioned if it was all real. In the days that followed, James tried to keep up appearances, continuing his routine at the cafe and helping Grace at the flower shop whenever he could. Their closeness remained, but he knew he couldn't sustain the lie forever. Each time he got closer to Grace, he felt the weight of his words bearing down on him. Grace, on the other hand, began to observe James more closely. Although he had explained his past, she still noticed something different about him, something that didn't completely add up. James was kind and helpful, but there were moments when he seemed distant, as if he was always watching his words. Sometimes she would catch him distracted, staring off into the distance, as if he was carrying a bigger secret than the one he had revealed. One afternoon, while they were working together at the flower shop, Grace asked casually, "Do you ever think about going back to your old life one day? I mean, if things were to get better?" James was caught off guard by the question. He hesitated for a moment, trying to decide what to say. "I don't know," he finally replied. "The life I had before wasn't healthy. Even if things got resolved, I don't think I'd want to go back. Here, with you, I feel like I found something much more valuable." Grace smiled, appreciating the answer, but a shadow of doubt still lingered in her mind. She wanted to believe him, but felt there was still something unsaid. Despite this, her attraction to James was undeniable, and the two continued to spend more time together, talking about their dreams and hopes for the future. As James delved deeper into this new life, a part of him began to transform. He no longer saw his old routine of luxury and power the same way. The simplicity he found in the town and his growing relationship with Grace had changed his perspective. He started to realize that what really mattered weren't possessions or status, but the small things that now made him feel alive. The moments with Grace, the tranquility of the town, and the value of a life lived with purpose. But at the same time, the fear of being discovered remained. James knew that eventually, the truth would come out, and the trust he was starting to rebuild with Grace would crumble. He was trapped in a cycle of lies he had created, and while he knew he needed to tell the truth, he still couldn't find the courage to do so. James's transformation was just beginning. He was becoming a different man, someone who valued what truly mattered. But the burden of his lie still tied him to his past. Each passing day, he wondered how much longer he could sustain this new story before it all fell apart. After the new story James told Grace, their relationship continued at a slower pace, without the direct tension that had previously threatened to separate them. The lie about his past seemed to have created a temporary truce, allowing the two to get closer once again, even though full trust was still distant. James continued to work at the cafe and help Grace at the flower shop whenever he had time. The simplicity of these moments together began to strengthen them in a way James had never experienced before. Though he knew his new lie wouldn't solve everything, he clung to the hope that, with time, things would work out, and he would find a way to reveal the truth without losing Grace. Grace, on her part, still felt a slight distrust, but James's constant presence and his willingness to help her keep her mother's business running put her more at ease. She began to relax a bit more in his company, and conversations about the future and her dreams for the flower shop became more frequent. They spent hours talking about how they could expand the business, plan events, and sometimes even dreamed together about what life would be like if they both settled there forever. One sunny afternoon, while organizing a large flower order for a local wedding, Grace paused for a moment and watched James work. He seemed so focused and dedicated, something that made her smile. "You know you're good at this, right?" she said, laughing as she saw him trying to adjust a bouquet that kept coming apart. James smiled back. "Maybe I've found a new career. Who knew working with flowers could be so rewarding?" Grace laughed, but there was a different sparkle in her eyes. She was starting to see James in a new way, not just as someone trying to escape a troubled past, but as someone who could be part of her future. The way he got involved in the things that were important to her, the way he genuinely seemed to care. All of this started to ease the fears she still carried. As time went on, the casual meetings at the cafe and afternoons at the flower shop turned into something more. The two began going on small walks by the seaside, sometimes sharing comfortable silences, other times laughing and talking about trivial things. The physical and emotional closeness between them grew organically, and gradually, the space that the initial lie had created was filled with sincere moments of connection. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Write purpose in the comments. Only those who get here will understand. And now, let's continue with the story. On a quiet evening, after closing the flower shop together, James suggested they go to the pier to watch the sunset. Grace hesitated for a moment, but accepted the invitation with a smile. They walked side by side, unhurried, as the sky slowly changed colors, painted with shades of orange and pink. When they reached the end of the pier, James sat down on one of the wooden benches, and Grace did the same. The soft sound of waves gently hitting the rocks created a peaceful atmosphere, and for a few minutes, the two just enjoyed the moment in silence. It was Grace who finally spoke first. "You know, James," she began, still looking out at the horizon, "I never thought someone like you would come into my life. I was so focused on the flower shop, on my mother's legacy, that sometimes I forget about myself." James looked at her with tenderness. "I think that's one of the reasons I admire you so much, Grace. You're strong, determined, and you truly care about the things that really matter." Grace smiled, but there was something else in her expression. "I do care. And that's why sometimes I still worry about you. I know you're running from something, or someone, and I try not to let that get in the way of what we're building. But I can't help wondering if one day you'll just leave and never come back." James felt a tightness in his chest as he heard her words. He knew this was the direct consequence of his lies. Grace's doubt, even if subtle, was an open wound he had caused, and now it was he who paid the price. He gently took Grace's hand, turning to face her. "I'm not going anywhere, Grace. I'm here, and I don't want to leave. I don't want to run anymore." She looked into his eyes, searching for the sincerity she so desperately wanted to believe. "I want to believe that, James. I really do." The days that followed were similar, with moments of growing closeness between them. James started to feel more at ease with the simple life they had created together, and Grace, little by little, began to let go of her suspicions, allowing herself to enjoy the present. But as peaceful as the days were, there was a quiet tension. Both knew their feelings for each other were deepening, yet the unresolved past lingered like a shadow. One evening, after a long day of work, James and Grace were at the flower shop, finishing the last details for a large order due the next day. Their laughter and the lightness of each other's company made the tiredness almost disappear. When they finished, Grace pulled out a bottle of wine she had been saving for a special occasion and suggested they toast to the success of the business. As they laughed and talked, the atmosphere between them became more relaxed. As time passed, the physical closeness between them created a palpable romantic tension. James looked at Grace and, in a sudden impulse, reached out to hold her hand. She didn't pull back. Instead, her eyes met his with a mix of anticipation and affection. Without a second thought, he gently pulled her closer, and in a soft movement, their lips met. The kiss was slow and full of meaning, a moment they had both been waiting for so long. In that instant, the world around them faded away. There were no more lies or secrets, just the genuine desire to be together. When the kiss finally ended, Grace looked at him with a gentle smile, as if this was the moment of confirmation that, despite everything, she was willing to stay by his side. For a brief moment, James allowed himself to feel a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. However, deep down, he knew he was still far from resolving the truth he had been hiding. But for now, that night, in the warmth of the flower shop, he let himself be carried away by what he felt and by who he was becoming. After that first kiss, James and Grace began sharing even more intense and meaningful moments. Their relationship blossomed, with small acts of affection, exchanged glances, and the tranquility of a simpler, more authentic life. James, although burdened by the weight of his lies, started to see himself as someone different from the cold, isolated man he once was. The powerful billionaire who controlled everything from his ivory tower now seemed like a distant memory. James had always been a hard person to read, even for himself. In his youth, he had learned that material success was what mattered, that respect came through power and the ability to control everything around him. But after meeting Grace, all of that began to change. He discovered there was a deeper meaning in the simple things in life, in the daily work at the flower shop, in conversations at sunset, in shared smiles at the cafe. These small joys made him into someone he never thought he could be. A person capable of loving without expecting anything in return. Grace, on the other hand, had always been a strong and determined woman, despite the challenges she faced since her mother's death. The flower shop was more than just a business to her. It was her family's legacy, the symbol of everything she fought for. Her life wasn't easy, but she held on to hope and love for what she did. When James entered her life, she saw in him someone who, despite being mysterious and full of secrets, seemed to understand her struggle in a unique way. Even with her doubts, Grace couldn't deny how special he made her feel, as if, for the first time, someone truly saw her for who she was. The difficulties they both faced throughout their lives made them relatable to many people. James, despite his wealth, was a man searching for something money couldn't buy, a real, fulfilling, and purposeful life. Grace, with her humility and determination, represented those who fight daily to keep their lives in order, seeking meaning amidst losses and challenges. Though they came from different worlds, James and Grace had something in common: the desire to find happiness in what truly mattered. The contrast between their backgrounds didn't separate them, it united them. Grace taught him to value what he had lost sight of, the importance of honesty, simplicity, and hard work. James, in turn, showed her that even in the face of adversity, true love can come from the most unexpected places. As the days passed, their relationship grew stronger, and they came to rely on each other in ways they might not openly admit. Grace, with her gentle heart and resilient spirit, helped James discover a part of himself he never knew. She challenged him to be better, to confront his own flaws, and to seek redemption not through grand gestures, but through sincerity, in his daily actions. One calm afternoon, while arranging flowers for an event, Grace paused for a moment and watched James with a gentle smile. "You've changed so much since you got here," she said softly without taking her eyes off the arrangement she was working on. James looked at her, surprised by the observation. "What do you mean?" Grace sighed lightly. "When you arrived, it seemed like you were carrying the weight of the world. I know you still have your secrets, but you seem lighter now, like you found something you were looking for a long time." James reflected on Grace's words, and indeed he had changed. Before, his life was driven by the need for control, but now he found peace in letting things flow, in allowing the unexpected to surprise him. Grace was right. He had found something he didn't know he was searching for. The simplicity of a life lived with purpose. Grace had also changed since James entered her life. As strong and independent as she was, she had always struggled to keep the flower shop and her mother's legacy going on her own. Now, with James by her side, she felt she didn't have to carry it all alone. For the first time, she could share her fears, dreams, and hopes with someone who truly understood and supported her. The townspeople also began to notice the change in James. At the cafe where he worked, customers treated him like one of their own. No one there knew his true identity, and James preferred it that way. He liked being just James Carter, the ordinary man who helped serve coffee and arrange flowers. This anonymity gave him the freedom to live without the expectations and judgments that always surrounded him in his previous life. On a quiet evening, Grace and James were sitting outside the flower shop, watching the streetlights. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," Grace said, breaking the silence. "Someone who truly understands me, who's willing to stay despite everything." James felt his heart race at her words. He knew this was the moment he should be completely honest, but the new lie he had told still held him back. He hadn't yet found the courage to confess his true identity, and this secret continued to hang over them like a shadow over their growing relationship. "I never thought I'd find someone like you either, Grace," James said, holding her hand tenderly. "You've changed everything for me." Grace smiled, gently squeezing his hand. In that moment, they were just two ordinary people, seeking love and comfort in each other. But as sweet as that moment was, James knew the weight of the truth would only grow heavier. He could only hope that when he finally revealed who he really was, Grace could forgive him. The relationship between James and Grace seemed to be blossoming with each passing day, but the burden of the truth he carried grew just as quickly. James knew the moment when everything might fall apart was near, and as much as he tried to convince himself that he could keep up the lie indefinitely, reality was about to come knocking in an unavoidable way. The turning point came on a calm morning when an unfamiliar customer walked into the flower shop. He was a well-dressed man with an imposing presence, seeming out of place in the small town. Grace was helping a regular customer, while James was in the back arranging flowers when the man walked in. Grace greeted him politely, but as the man looked around the shop, his eyes widened in shock when he spotted James. "James Donovan?" The man's voice echoed through the flower shop. Grace immediately turned to the man and then to James, confused. She had never heard that name before, and the look of surprise on James' face confirmed that something was terribly wrong. James froze for a moment, feeling panic surge through his body. The man who recognized him was a former business associate, someone who knew exactly who he really was. He tried to play it off, but it was too late. "I can't believe it," the man continued, laughing in disbelief. "What are you doing here, hiding out in this small town like an ordinary man, after everything you've built?" Grace looked at James wide-eyed, trying to make sense of what was happening. "James, what is he talking about?" James felt his world crumbling. This was the situation he feared most, and now it was unfolding right before his eyes. There was no more running, no more lies he could tell. He knew he would have to face the truth, and with that, the consequences of everything he had done. "Grace, I can explain," he said, desperate. But the look on her face already showed that the trust between them had been deeply shaken. She stepped back from him, the pain in her eyes clear. "Explain what? Who are you really?" Grace asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disappointment. James looked around, feeling the air grow heavy. The customer who had recognized him stood there, baffled by the scene, while Grace waited for an answer. He knew it was time to tell the truth, to finally reveal who he was, even if it meant destroying everything they had built. "My real name is James Donovan," he began, his voice tense. "I'm a billionaire. I own several companies. Everything I told you about my past was a lie. I wasn't running from financial problems. I made up that story so you wouldn't know who I really was." Grace stepped back as if she had been struck. Her mind raced in 1,000 directions, trying to process what she had just heard. The man she had built a relationship with whom she had shared her fears and hopes, wasn't who she thought he was. He had lied to her this entire time. "You lied to me," she whispered, the pain in her voice unmistakable. "All this time, you pretended to be someone else." James took a step toward her, desperate to fix the situation. "Grace, I did it because I wanted someone to love me for who I am, not for my money. I knew that if you knew the truth, everything would change. I just wanted to find something real, something true." But Grace couldn't hear his words. The revelation hit her in a devastating way, and the trust she had started to rebuild was now in ruins. "You built our relationship on lies, James. How can I trust you now? How do I know what was real and what was just part of your act?" James tried to reach out to her again, but Grace stepped back, her hands trembling. "Grace, please. Everything I feel for you is real. I lied about who I was, but I never lied about my feelings. I love you, Grace. That was never a lie." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know if I can believe you. I need some time." Without another word, Grace turned and walked out of the flower shop, leaving James standing there, feeling powerless as he watched the love of his life walk away. The silence that followed was crushing. The man who had recognized James gave an awkward apology, realizing the gravity of the situation, and soon left the shop, leaving James alone with his thoughts. He knew he had lost Grace at that moment. The pain he felt was overwhelming, but he knew it was the consequence of his choices. The lie he had built over so much time had finally turned against him, and he was reaping what he had sown. The days that followed were dark for James. He kept working at the cafe, but now without Grace's presence. She avoided him, keeping her distance, and he respected her space, knowing that pressuring her wouldn't solve anything. The town, once a peaceful refuge, now felt oppressive. What was once an escape from the superficiality of his previous life had turned into a constant reminder of his mistakes. James wondered if he would ever have the chance to make things right. He knew that earning Grace's forgiveness would be difficult, but he also knew he couldn't give up on her. His love for her was real, even if the lies he told had tainted their relationship. Grace, on her part, was dealing with internal confusion. She felt betrayed and hurt, but at the same time, she couldn't deny the love she still felt for James. She distanced herself to try to understand what really mattered, the lies he told or the genuine moments they shared. The upheaval had shaken their relationship in a way that seemed irreparable, but deep in their hearts, both James and Grace knew their story wasn't over yet. The question was whether they could rebuild the trust they once had, or if everything was lost forever. James knew he had to do something to win Grace back, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy. After everything she had discovered, the bond of trust they had built was shattered. He spent his days thinking about how to redeem himself, how he could show Grace that despite the lies, his love for her was genuine. However, the fear that she might never forgive him haunted him. Grace, on the other hand, was conflicted. Her mind was torn between the love she felt for James and the pain caused by the lies. She avoided any contact with him, needing space to process her feelings. Even so, she couldn't help but remember the genuine moments they had shared, the conversations and gestures of affection, that made her believe that maybe James was truly different from the billionaire he claimed to be. Days passed slowly, and James decided he couldn't just sit and wait for things to resolve themselves. He needed to do something concrete to show Grace that he was willing to change, that he was willing to be the honest man she deserved. Then he had an idea. James knew how important the flower shop was to Grace, how hard she fought to keep the business and her mother's legacy alive. Maybe by helping her strengthen that dream, he could at least start to correct the mistakes of the past. Without telling anyone, James used his resources and contacts to help Grace in a discreet way. He didn't want her to know he was involved, but he wanted to give her a chance to expand the flower shop to ensure the business truly thrived. Silently, he began organizing a marketing campaign for the flower shop, increasing its visibility in the town and surrounding areas. He also made contacts with suppliers, ensuring that Grace had access to better quality flowers at more affordable prices. The impact of these changes was quickly felt. Grace's flower shop started attracting more customers, larger orders came in, and the business began to grow in ways she had never imagined. Grace was surprised by the sudden increase in demand and started to wonder how it had happened. Although she was happy with the success, part of her suspected there was more behind the sudden change. One day, while arranging flowers for a big event, Grace overheard a conversation between two customers who were praising the new website for the flower shop. One of the customers commented that the new marketing was excellent and that she should thank the man behind the campaign. That made Grace stop what she was doing and look at the customers, confused. Man behind the campaign? She thought. She hadn't hired anyone to do marketing or renew the website. Grace decided to investigate and, after some discreet questions, discovered that James was behind it all. The increase in business, the new customers, the better supplier contracts, everything was a result of James's efforts to help her without asking for anything in return. She was in shock. Even after all the lies, he was still trying to help her silently, without expecting recognition or gratitude. Driven by a mix of emotions, Grace decided to confront him. That evening, she went to the cafe where she knew he still worked. When she saw him, she felt a knot form in her stomach. Part of her was still hurt, but another part couldn't ignore what he had done for her, even after everything that had happened. James, seeing her walk into the cafe, was surprised. He hadn't seen her for days, and the fact that she had come there filled him with hope. He nervously wiped his hands and walked over to her, unsure of what to expect. "Grace," he began softly, I didn't know if you'd ever come see me again." Grace looked at him, her conflicting feelings clear in her eyes. "I found out what you did for the flower shop, James," she said directly. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" James lowered his head, ashamed but also relieved that she knew. "I just wanted to help. I knew how much the flower shop means to you. I didn't want it to be about me, Grace. I didn't want you to think I was trying to buy your forgiveness." Grace watched him for a moment before speaking again. "Why did you do it? After everything that happened, why keep helping me?" James looked up at her, his gaze sincere. "Because I love you, Grace. And even if you never want to see me again, I wanted to do something for you. Something that meant what you and your flower shop mean to me. I lied. I did things I can't undo. But this, helping you keep your mother's dream alive, was something I knew I could do honestly." Grace felt a wave of emotion wash over her. There was still pain in her heart, but there was also something else. A feeling that despite the lies, James truly cared. He had made mistakes, yes, but his dedication and effort to make things right showed that he was trying to be a better person. "I'm still hurt, James," Grace said, her tone softer. "You lied to me in a way I didn't expect, but at the same time, you did it because you were trying to find something real. I don't know if I can forget everything at once, but I see that you're trying." James took a step forward, his eyes full of regret and hope. "Grace, I'll keep trying, every day. I won't give up on us. I made a terrible mistake, but my love for you is real. And if you give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make things right." The silence that followed was filled with tension. Grace looked at James, seeing the vulnerable and sincere man before her, and sighed. "I can't promise I'll forget everything all at once, James, but maybe I can try to forgive. It will take time, but if you keep being honest, maybe we can find a way to rebuild what we had." James felt a wave of relief and gratitude at her words. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was a start. He knew there was still a long way to go. But that small opening in Grace's heart was what he needed to keep fighting. With Grace's promise to try to forgive and give them a second chance, James felt a renewal in his spirit. He knew there was still a long way to go to rebuild the broken trust, but he was determined to prove that his love for her was sincere and that he had changed. Now it was all about patience, honesty, and small gestures that, over time, could heal the wounds left by past lies. The months that followed were filled with moments where James and Grace, little by little, rebuilt their relationship. James continued helping with the flower shop, but this time, without trying to hide who he was. He was present, honest, and dedicated, and Grace noticed. She, on her part, still dealt with the emotional scars left by the revelations, but each day with James made her believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved a second chance. One day, while organizing flowers for a wedding, James paused for a moment and watched Grace, smiling as she worked. He had never seen her so at ease, so focused on what she loved doing. And it was then that he realized he couldn't wait any longer to take the next step. His love for her was real, and he wanted her to know it in a definitive way. That same afternoon, James secretly went out to plan something special. He wanted the moment to be perfect, something that would show Grace how much she meant to him and how much he was willing to fight for their love. He decided to organize a candlelit dinner at the place that had become special to both of them. The pier where, some time ago, they had shared moments of silence and tenderness at sunset. On the scheduled day, he invited Grace for a walk after work, just like they used to. Unaware of James's plans, Grace agreed, and the two walked side by side, chatting lightly, until they reached the pier. When they arrived, Grace was greeted by a sight that left her speechless. The pier was illuminated by small lights, and a table decorated with flowers from her own flower shop was set up, waiting for them. The gentle sound of the waves in the background created a romantic setting, and the sky, painted with the colors of the sunset, made the moment even more special. "James, what is this?" Grace asked, surprised and emotional, turning to him. James smiled, visibly nervous but determined. "I wanted to show you how much you mean to me, Grace, and I also wanted to ask you a very important question." He guided her to the table, where a small bouquet of flowers, carefully chosen by James, awaited her. Grace, still trying to process what was happening, sat down and looked at him expectantly. James knelt before her, his heart racing. "Grace," he began, holding her hand. "Since the moment I met you, my life has changed in ways I never imagined. You showed me the value of simple things, the power of honesty, and the meaning of true love. I know I've made many mistakes, lied, and hurt you, but every day by your side, I've been trying to be a better man." He paused, looking into Grace's eyes, which reflected a mixture of surprise and emotion. "Grace, I can't imagine my life without you. And today, here in the place that means so much to us, I want to ask you to spend the rest of your life with me. Grace, will you marry me?" Grace was in shock for a moment. The surprise took her completely, and her eyes filled with tears. She never expected this moment to come so soon, especially after everything they had been through. But as she looked at James, she saw the sincerity in his eyes, saw the man who had changed, who was willing to do whatever it took to deserve her love. She knew the road to this point hadn't been easy, but she also knew what they had was special. "James," she began, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what to say." James continued holding her hand, waiting with his heart in his throat. "Say you love me and that you'll give me the chance to make you happy forever." Grace laughed through her tears and nodded. "I love you, James. I've always loved you, even when I was hurt and afraid to trust you again. And yes, I accept to marry you." Hearing those words, James felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him. He stood up and pulled Grace into a tight hug as she cried tears of joy. The sunset behind them was the perfect backdrop for that moment. There, on the pier that had witnessed so much of their romance, they sealed their commitment with a kiss, knowing that despite all the obstacles, true love had won. The preparations for the wedding began soon after. The small town, where James had found his refuge and where Grace had kept her mother's flower shop alive, was the perfect setting for the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. They decided to have a simple ceremony just for close friends and family, in the garden of the flower shop, surrounded by the flowers that had been such an important part of their story. On the wedding day, as Grace walked down the aisle surrounded by flowers, James watched her with tears in his eyes. He had never felt so lucky in his life. The woman he loved, the woman who had transformed his life, was about to become his wife. And in that moment, he knew that everything he had done, all the effort to redeem himself, had been worth it. When Grace finally reached the altar, James held her hand and smiled. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me," he whispered. Grace smiled back, her eyes shining with happiness. "And you showed me that even in the midst of difficulties, love can bloom." In front of their friends, family, and the entire town that had welcomed them, James and Grace said their vows, promising to love and care for each other for the rest of their lives. And so the billionaire who pretended to be poor to find true love finally found not just love, but also the peace and happiness he had long sought. The end of that journey couldn't have been more perfect. Love won, and James and Grace, now united in marriage, were ready to start a new chapter in their lives, knowing that together they could face anything. What did you think of James and Grace's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, what rating would you give this story? If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.